Hello, Sam.
Hey, Andrew. Good to talk to you.
I know I've been looking forward to this. You and I have been working together for the last couple years on numerous things, and so just to talk through some of that stuff is going to be fun. But I would be remiss if I did not start with your fascination for wrestling.
Oh, we can start there. Absolutely.
Yep.
It started for me with my older Hillard cousins up in the Chicago area in Hammond, Indiana. They were wrestling fans, and I went up for a visit. Their family originally from Western Kentucky. And at that era, in the 50s, 60s, and on, we had a lot of people from the Western Kentucky coal fields who moved up to work in the steel mills in the Chicago area because the job markets were tough here and there were jobs there. And so went up, spent Thanksgiving weekend with them. They basically introduced me to professional wrestling, and Thanksgiving weekend 1991 there was a wrestling pay-per-view. And the main event was The Undertaker versus Hulk Hogan. And by the end of the weekend, they had sent me home with a list of all the characters that they knew of. It was almost like a character Bible. Here are all the wrestlers. Here are their heights and weights, their finishing maneuver, their hometown, everything they knew as almost like a starter pack from elder fans handed down
Yeah.
to a newbie. And so then I really started researching, finding whatever I could, finding the local TV shows, and got really into the fan culture and fan community side of wrestling. By the time I got to high school, I had convinced my local newspaper. So a little bit of a backstory. My Mama Beulah Hillard, so all of our grandmother, was a society columnist for the local weekly newspaper. And back in those days, before there was a Facebook, if you wanted to find out what was happening with your family, your friends, other people in your hometown, you bought the weekly paper, and every little town had their own section. And a curator, like my Mama Beulah, would collect all the news from town, and it would include, there's a potluck happening, family reunion down at the park pavilion, but it would also be this family went out of town on vacation to Chicago and saw so and so. We had visitors from out of town visiting family in town, and my favorite was this family in town and this other family in town spent Saturday afternoon together, and the key line always was a good time was had by all.
Yep.
Never fact checked, so it was the original fake news. But my grandmother was having health problems when I was in middle school. Asked me to take over her society column. So at that time, there was a bunch of 60 and 70-year-old women and one middle school boy writing the society columns in the Ohio County Messenger and Times News newspapers. But I discovered that the papers liked free content. So soon thereafter, they started getting a weekly private investigator serialized fiction story from my friend Tyrell Kessinger and me. Cliffhanger ending every week. I got stopped at the Danks Funeral Home once, and how are Curtis and Pal going to get out of this one?
Yeah.
And inside the squared circle, a weekly column about professional wrestling news and opinions. And so started writing that weekly column. Ended up when I was in high school, my buddies and I started producing an annual Halloween costume party wrestling show. My buddies rented a pro wrestling ring, and we had local high school athletes and some non-athletes who dressed up as wrestlers and put on wrestling matches, probably running afoul of all sorts of Kentucky Athletic Commission rules and regulations. But we scripted them. We had a storyline that went through the evening, and we were basically impersonating characters from television with a few of our own original characters.
Yeah.
So that was really my basic start in wrestling when I came to WKU. I did my undergrad thesis on how pro wrestling was adapting to a digital age. These were early internet days. And wrestling was thriving in the middle of all this digital disruption. So I was
Yep.
fascinated that I was a journalism major and working in newspapers, and newspapers were falling apart, but pro wrestling
Mm-hmm.
was thriving. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, what's going on here? What's the difference and why? Ended up teaching a class on the history of pro wrestling at WKU, and then taught a similar class at MIT after that. So since then, I've had a chance to work on several pro wrestling related things, and I find pro wrestling, like a lot of what's considered low culture,
Yeah.
has in effect contributed to a lot of innovation in the media industries
Mm-hmm.
because they try stuff, right? They're not.
Yeah, right. They're fearless. I mean, that is there's so many things that you've gotten into. I think about the reason I brought up wrestling because I think it ties so much of the things that you're involved in together. Like you just mentioned, they could try stuff, right? Well, it's like wrestling is this masterful storytelling, this art of storytelling that has risk, that has drama, that has character. And like you just said, they're not afraid to try stuff because it's so much of their MO as wrestling is knowing who they are and leaning into their strengths. And so that's why I wanted to bring that up. But then also hearing you talk about your mamaw, I'm also from Kentucky, Henderson, Kentucky, which we talked about. And I had a mamaw, still have a mamaw, fortunately. But I remember having Burgoo fundraisers and contributing to college funds with these get-togethers, and yeah, so same type of stuff. I think we were involved in terms of shaping who we were. But the storytelling side of wrestling is what I wanted to kind of talk about and how that kind of blends the things you do together.
Yeah, so I'm not a massive sports fan. I mean, I grew up watching college basketball because if you're from Kentucky, you have to. And we were able to, in effect, with wrestling, you're able to take the sports conceit, but then bring scripted drama into it. So the other genre that I grew up watching that's low culture, because of my memorabilia, were soap operas. And so
Mm-hmm.
soap operas share a lot in common with pro wrestling, which a lot of people wouldn't necessarily expect, but they are low culture. They have no off seasons. They, in effect, have somewhere in the realm of 200 and whatever the beyond weekends, 260 episodes a year
Mm-hmm.
being produced, and they have a cast of characters that often go 40, 50, and beyond characters on the canvas at any one time. So if you think about that setup, really soap operas and wrestling, one's traditionally been marketed more at women, one more at men.
Mm-hmm.
But the setup is very similar. You have interactions across this whole cast of characters. You have sort of an immersive fictional story world that people get deeply connected to, and you have a fan culture surrounding it that helps explain the lore to new people who come in, and that's because the storylines themselves are not as complex as, say, an Oscar-nominated movie or
Lord of the Rings or Breaking Bad or
totally.
things like that.
So I like to say when you watch that kind of complex television or films, the story is complex because it has all these deep layers.
Right.
What makes a story world like pro wrestling complex is not through depth, but through accretion. So the fact that there's several hours of new content produced per week and there's no off season means to fully understand the intricacy of all the characters and the way they've interacted with each others and the full character histories. there's probably more backstory than you could ever consume when you come into the fandom. You know, you're not going to go back and say, well, I'm going to watch WWE from the beginning, right? That's not a thing you can
Yeah.
you can do. So, but a lot of these characters at any given time, you've got characters who are the veterans who've been around forever, and you'll have constant callbacks to history and storylines and references from the past. And so all that history kind of layers this complexity on these story worlds. At the same time, you could tune in to wrestling and have never watched it before, and
Exactly.
just watch a guy who seems like kind of a jerk and another guy who seems, to be following the rules, have a match and root for it without knowing anything other than the basic conceit of one of these folks are going to win, one of them's going to lose, and the idea would be the winner gets the purse and the loser goes home with little to no money. So it matters to them who wins and who loses.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a lot of drama at multiple levels, and it allows you to have a very casual fan base all the way to the most dedicated, studied, immersed, listens to endless podcasts, goes back and rewatches old episodes type of super fan.
Yeah, totally with you. The reason I wanted to sort of bring up wrestling, obviously, so people can kind of get to know, some of the things you're passionate about. And I know you're one of those people that are involved in so many things, and it's just like your point with wrestling, where you can just kind of drop in at one point to kind of get wrestling. I feel like with you, it's kind of like you're in here and here and here and here, and it's like, who is Sam Ford? It's like, well, he's all of these things kind of put together, amalgamated into one
Roddy
thing.
Piper, as the great philosopher Roddy Piper would once say, just when they think they know the answers, I change the questions.
That's right, exactly. It's so true, and it's like even myself, I have struggled with really calling myself like, what am I? I don't know. I like philosophy. I like sports. I like film. I like video production. I like creative strategy. I like marketing. It's like all of these things, but they're all kind of interrelated, especially when it comes to like the work that you do. It's like if you sort of see how all those things are connected, then you can see how your strength is maybe not just this one specific thing that you do, but it's like you're able to kind of tie all these things together. And so the reason I wanted to bring in wrestling outside of getting to know you is I have, and you can tell me what you think about this. I have observed, and I'm kind of shifting towards like something maybe a little more marketing focused. I have observed in the marketing world now, I think that there is this real push for people who are kind of ahead of the curve to think about bringing what they provide in front of the people that they're trying to reach in this sort of like community building aspect.
Yep.
Where it's not just hey, I have this thing and this thing does X and here are all the reasons you should do it. It's more of a, hey, how are we in commune with each other where I'm helping you solve whatever problem that it is. Can you maybe speak about that? Because I think so much of the work that you do now with professional side of who you are is really that, is community building for the purpose of trying to like collectively, I don't want to use the word progress, but like collectively grow or collectively thrive maybe is the word to use, by all of us with all of our different strengths coming together to reach said goal. Maybe you can speak about that.
Totally, and I'll back up. So take soap operas. What fascinates me about soap operas is any daytime soap opera that's been on the air for a while, there's no single creator. Mm-hmm. Right, so you have a show that has, let's say, 40 or 50 characters on it at any given time, 260 hours of television a year. No one person is writing all that, and no one actor is the single lead star. You then imagine it taking place year after year. The original writing team is not writing General Hospital today, right? All the original writers are probably dead. So you've got generations of people who then come along and create those characters. And by the time you've had thousands of actors on that show. And that more resembles what the chaos of real life and work life is like. That, very few times is there a single, it's like in business, you'll have the single great man theory that this one leader, in politics, right? This one leader comes in and does everything. And that's never the case, right? It's a complex combination of a whole bunch of people who partner together to make things happen, who bring their strengths to the table. And so to me, work life is ultimately like that.
Right.
And anytime you're trying to produce something that's never been done before or in a way that's never been done before, there's just myriad constant questions. So, things like soap operas or pro wrestling appeals to me because it's live. If you mess up, you just keep going. There are no retakes. Wrestling is often performed live on television. Soap operas for many of their first years were produced live daily in studio. So what happens if a wall falls over? Grandpa Hughes says, "Damn termites," and you keep going, right? So to that end, that aspect of it forces creativity and innovation, and I think work life in the modern era is a lot more like that than a prestige TV show or an hour and 30-minute complex drama, because very few times do you get to work on something that compact and tight and auteured. And that's what I like about complex collaborative projects, is how do you tackle something that it takes a team to achieve, especially when you're trying to do something that's not the daily routine where everybody already knows exactly what to do. And when we live in a world of digital disruption, I started my career in newspapers thinking that I would go to work, collect, get a bunch of great stories under my belt in college, take that portfolio to some national newspapers and land a desk job and work your way up the ranks. And right as I tried to start doing that, the internet obliterated the newspaper business model. Yep. And so my career pathway was disrupted before I really even got off the ground with it. So that sort of forced me to think about, well, what do you do when the world's constantly being disrupted by the next wave of technology? You have to change the way you think. A frequent collaborator of mine at Deloitte Insights, his name's Jeff Pundyke. He has called it the untitled mindset. So, in an old days, let's say ad agency realm, you go in and you're an intern and then you become a junior account executive and you work your way. There was this ladder to climb that had these defined series of promotions, and you kind of knew where you started, where you were headed. And more and more frequently, there are just fewer and fewer professions that have that clear projection, right?
That's right.
So you can no longer look at somebody who works in the marketing or advertising or PR realm and just based on the person's title understand exactly what that means.
That's right.
That's a challenge, right? It's a challenge for talent to find their footing. It's a challenge for running a creative industries business. Yeah. But it's also a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
The way things have worked are no longer the way things are working. Creates a recipe for innovation.
Yeah, two threads I want to kind of pull on there. When I last talked to Amanda Havard, I think she did that. She worded this in a really good way. Is that a lot of times single words, single nouns, single titles are ambiguous. You don't actually know what that means. What the word marketing means to you means to me something else. What the word creative means to you means something else to me. And so she eloquently said the solution to the problem of nouns is sentences. And so it's like, I actually, instead of saying I'm a creative strategist, I help you solve problems creatively. Those are two different ways to articulate trying to get to the same thing. And I'm with you where it's like it's almost like I'm running with an idea here. The way that you kind of worded it, where it's like the untitled. It's almost like there was this hierarchy of like you had to get from this to this to this to this to go up that career ladder, and it was super clear what those guardrails were in order to get you to X. And the point of that was to advance in your career now. It's almost like that hierarchy has been flattened and democratized into sets of skills that are all interrelated rather than just these sort of peaks of I do this one specific thing. Because I think the reason for that is where this other thread I was going, was this sort of digital disruption that you were talking about, because we're seeing that happen in AI. That has totally flipped, I think, the marketing and creative services world on its head on how to use those tools in a right way. And so I think this digital disruption is making people think about who they are and what they do holistically, rather than just I do this one specific thing, especially in the digital world.
So, in my view, a lot of these industries, first of all, that were previously distinct, have all become the same, a piece or an aspect of the same thing. Mm-hmm. And, so take the media industries, right? So it's like, oh, here's the TV industry, here's the film industry, here's the radio industry, here's the publishing business. As you move into storytelling that crosses multiple platforms with transmedia storytelling, as you move into devices that deliver all of that content, that you're getting it from the same box, that has changed how people think about and relate to the content they consume. That also means it changes the nature of the relationship between these industries and the idea that they're distinct and completely separate. The walls come down, new walls, of course, get formed, new disciplines get shaped, but that has become a very constant and nebulous process. So again, just when we think we have the answers, the questions get changed, and the question is, who is they at this point? It's all of us. We're constantly adapting, and you have to get comfortable with those ways of working. So as we have started our company, InnoEngine, some of these forces that we're discussing have shaped our way of working. So one of our ongoing mantras is, we'll never be as bad at it again as we are this week. Hey, whatever we're doing, nobody knows the answer, right? Everything's changing. So let's help the companies we partner with. We come in to help guide the strategy and implementation of practical innovation projects. So companies trying to do something they've never done before, if they adopt that mantra, we'll never be as bad at it again as we are this week, it means they're rapidly improving, not tiny little incremental improvements, but like, hey, we're going to embrace doing something we've never done before, which means there are a lot of things we have to figure out, and there are a lot of things we will mess up along the way, and as long as we're going, if that's expected and is part of the process, then we'll watch what we're doing, we'll do small things to test, build on what we've learned, do that rapidly, grow through constant iterations. So when we talk about innovation as a series of gears and going through constant iterations, that's part of what we're talking about, is adapting that strategy, embracing that uncertainty, embracing the messiness. And so nobody is aiming for every detail being perfect in a pro wrestling production or a soap opera production, because there's more TV to make next week. And you've got to constantly be developing a new storyline, a new character, a new angle, a new payoff. And some things you'll do will work better than others. You learn from that. You constantly try to do more of what works. So if you embrace that strategy, that idea of constant improvement is key, and it helps build a culture that doesn't get to that perfect is the enemy of the good, but that focuses on a team working together, learning from each other's strengths, constantly just trying to figure it out, and not being afraid of something that we don't know, and to try stuff. And I think that culture, is hard to develop, and it's often hard for humans to embrace, but it requires collaborative effort.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I'm trying to think from the perspective of let's say a business owner, and that's a pretty big umbrella. Let's say a business owner, in the sense of the decisions they make. If they're spending money on something, there is this sort of risk reward evaluation that happens. So, and I'm trying to bring this back to marketing. Like, we're developing a tool right now that helps franchise owners. I know we've talked about this, and so much of that working is the owner trusting that what we're doing is actually going to help them, right? But there's a risk to it because they have to use capital, which is usually money, to get to that goal, and we're just helping them get there. But there is an element of the unknown, which is what I think you're kind of hitting on, is like you can't have this unreasonable expectation that, hey, we're going to go off the ground and we're going to hit 10x in 6 months. Okay. Now I see people selling that. Like, somebody sold me on that. All right. I'm going to get you X amount of ROI, 10x in 6 months, if not money back guarantee. And I'm like, anybody that thinks they have that stuff figured out is probably lying to you. Or they do have a reasonable level of predictability that it would be successful based on past experience, but there is still an element of the unknown because there's so many variables that can affect success or not. And I think when you're creatively trying to solve problems with a partner, as long as that is transparent, that like, look, I am ultimately trying to build a community with you using my skill set to get what you do in front of the people that you help. And there is going to be some level of exploration in order for us to get to that point. But once we get there, we're partners in this and we're both winning. I've been having, like, I know you understand that, but I've been having a hard time, I guess, articulating that in a way that helps us open the door to someone that we could help. Because a lot of times, here's what they see. Oh, I already spend X on marketing. It doesn't really do this for me. Oh, I have a social media manager, but I don't really know how that's contributing to lead gen or business success. I don't really want to spend a whole lot more money on stuff if I'm not for sure that it's going to work.
Well, and the question also gets back to how are you defining how it's going to work? So one of the things that concerns me is sometimes some of the most easily trackable or reliable stats can take you strategically in all the wrong directions. So
Right.
I'll give you an example. I was VP of Innovation at Univision.
Mm-hmm.
We, at that time, Univision's traditionally a television broadcasting company, mostly Spanish language holdings. The company had private equity owned, had bought up a lot of and launched some new digital media companies. There was a time period when everybody began to pivot to video. That was what it was called. And so suddenly all these media brands and platforms were producing content. They were producing it for social platform channels, which they didn't own.
All right.
And they were tracking they had all these stats and analytics for success. So they looked at it and said, look, we're producing content. The stuff we produced on our website gets these types of impressions when we produce things and publish it on Snapchat or publish it on Facebook. We have these numbers. So they started shifting whole teams and resources to producing content for these platforms. Problem was, they made no direct revenue off of those platforms, so they were spending a lot of money to produce content that was bringing in zero revenue. Mm-hmm. You look deeper and deeper into the stats, and you find it's counted as a view if people watched it at least 3 seconds at that time.
Yep.
So now suddenly the numbers look great. You're saying, hey, we're killing it. So I started going through and asking, contrarian questions. It was like, okay, if you produced a video and you're happy because it got 19 million views, but the average view time was 23 seconds and it was a 2-minute video, then does that say, well, we successfully got it in front of people and they decided they didn't want to watch it? It wasn't worth a minute and a half of their time. There's a different way of looking at that same stat.
Right.
And so when you start asking those contrarian questions, it really starts to poke and prod. So from my view, we can really, I think those questions are important to ask, because the things that are easiest to count are not always the thing that is most important to track. How is it tied to business outcomes?
That's right.
Not output, right, but outcomes.
Right.
There are a lot of things that are easier to count as activity, but did it meet your business objectives? Is it moving your business forward? Because the incentives that we give to teams, the things that we use internally to track success, shapes behavior inside any organization. And a lot of times organizations end up, for good intent, hey, we want to make sure people are productive. Here are the things that we can track about what they're doing. Now we're going to set goals based on those things that are easy to track. Then people set their behavior to those goals, but those goals end up not being well matched to the true business outcomes that the organization is trying to achieve.
Right.
And so, those are, to your point, those aren't simple and easy questions. Those are questions that require strategic discussion and direction, have to be thought through. Now, the flip side, it doesn't mean you have to check every variable all the time and question everything all the time. For things that are working and can be routine, then that's great. Our InnoEngine's mantra is, our unofficial tagline is, if you know what you need, it'll never be us.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're saying is we want processes to get to a point that if they're working and if they're figured out and they can turn into patterns and routines that reliably produce an outcome, that's the goal. So it's not you have to question everything all the time, but you also do have to periodically go back and re-question patterns that have been working, because if you just take them for granted,
that's right,
and the world is constantly changing around you, then a pattern that was working and you set on auto repeat, if you don't go back and check that, then you may find 5 years later the whole market conditions have changed and this pattern that you have on routine is no longer the efficient way to do things, and now it's costing you money.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, we see that feels like that happens, man. In the social media world, that feels like that could happen every 6 months, where they change the priority of the content type, whatever it is that the algorithms are prioritizing in terms of putting what you do in front of someone. Like, there's an individual I follow on LinkedIn, and his specialty is understanding the YouTube algorithm. Okay, so he knows exactly how to get like thumbnails. He knows how you need to structure your video. He knows what they're looking for. And just not even a week or two ago, he did an update that was super useful that we talked about. It's like Google's algorithms with YouTube now are looking for the actual thing that you're talking about in the audio itself, not so much in the description now, not what you put in the description, but what you're actually talking about. What you and I are talking about right now, it's going to care more about that than the text I put in the description. That is relatively new. And that is, to your point about pattern shifting, it's like, this is the whole thing with digital disruption, especially the AI is causing, is it's making people reconsider all of those patterns of how successful they actually are, which to me brings me back to my original point about community, that I'm observing that the companies and the individuals that are thinking about it that way, that are creating content for that purpose about community and what they do and how that contributes to community, I think are going to kind of stay ahead of the curve, and then just putting out a video or random social post on holidays about just random stuff that doesn't really mean anything to anybody.
Well, absolutely. And to your point, every odd behavior you see from an organization probably started from a point that was logical. It was in response to something, and the original move was probably a smart move. Not always, but often. And the problem just becomes when that logic is accepted. I had a professor once who said, Western thought was built on Descartes. And Cartesian philosophy is built on a single idea. He sort of logically did this thought experiment that looked at what do we know to be true? And he got down to one line, which is, I think, therefore I am. And he said, but once you accept that one truth, it's like, okay, I must exist because I'm sitting here wondering if I exist. So that's the one thing we know is true. And he said, once you accept that truth, then what other things must also be true, and you start building truths on top of yourself. The problem is that imagines that conditions never change.
Right.
So if you start building those logical steps, that's what you see a lot of organizations do. They say, okay, these are the market conditions, so therefore we must react this way, and then we'll build this on top of that, and we'll build this on top of that. And as you build more and more infrastructure, it's like, but in the meantime, everything's changed. So the step 2 or step 3 down there, no longer true. To your point, there was a time period where SEO and putting in meta text because SEO really mattered and made some companies jump to the top of the list, and then that became standardized, and then everybody was doing the same SEO tasks. So then it's like if you find a shortcut to work and then you tell everybody about it and you post about it, and everybody starts taking the shortcut to work, and the shortcut to work is not a shortcut to work. Everything changed. Or, I don't know, somebody built a new road that came through, or they widened that old road to 4 lanes or 6 lanes, and suddenly the thing that caused the traffic jam didn't anymore, and you're still driving through all these windy back roads because you didn't look at the map or watch the news. And so I think a lot of organizations end up doing that. And that's the problem with something becoming a pattern or that never gets rechecked. So when I say InnoEngine is there, we both are helping companies when they're trying to do something they've never done before, but we're also trying to help them when they're trying to do something in a way they haven't done before. And a lot of that is about checking those patterns, checking those procedures. Hey, is this still relevant? Is this still the best way to do it? We've discovered this way of doing things has become outdated or needs to be rethought. And that is when I say we're a strategy firm focused on innovation process, that innovation process has a similarity to it no matter what type of problem you're trying to solve. There are a series of steps that goes through figuring out a new way of doing things, rethinking assumptions, and trying to find a new pattern. And those patterns and those models have similarities across business sectors. You mentioned, so some of our projects that we founded our company on are what I call massively multi-stakeholder projects. So the Metals Innovation Initiative. So we're bringing the state government together with multiple metals companies, and those metals companies are in aluminum and stainless steel and copper, and they're producing products that go into automotive and aerospace and food and beverage, and so the companies are complex and different. The state government partnered with them. They prioritize different things. They have different ways of talking. They have different success metrics. Then you bring in all the ecosystem partners who become part of that: universities, K-12 school systems, who are producing talent that go into those industries, startups who are creating new and commercializing new solutions that matter to those industries, nonprofits like chambers of commerce and economic developers and workforce development groups who are trying to solve the problems of that industry. And then you find problems that all those groups care about or some combination and say, let's work on this project, and we're going to work on it in a collaborative manner. That takes a lot of, to your point, nuance. There's no clear roadmap of exactly how to do that. At a local level, we're doing this with the BG 2050 project. How do you bring, in this case, started by the county government, but more than 100 different stakeholders together to solve problems? You mentioned the work that we did in implementing a new AI product for a team at Google. It required a marketing campaign that needed multiple types of expertise. So you had multiple creative agencies coming together, sometimes who would be competitors to one another, but working collaboratively on a project, each kind of leaning into their area of storytelling expertise. And every one of those scenarios is about trying to achieve something that hasn't been done before and helping teams work together in new ways. But even if you're in a single organizations are really complex combinations of multiple teams and departments. And so even inside a single organization, even an organization of only a few people, but obviously the bigger the company, the more complex it gets. These types of innovation processes are really, really complicated to navigate because you've got teams trying to come together and work on something where the roadmap's not defined, roles are not always clearly defined. People are trying to learn new ways of working, trying to tackle a problem they've not tackled before. There are patterns and models to help organizations as they go through that complex change.
Yeah, I think about this. I knew this would happen. I knew we'd get super deep into conversation, and then we're 45 minutes in. But I'm gonna keep going. I don't have a specific time window. I'm gonna just keep going. But I know just from the work that we've done together, like I see how InnoEngine works on these more, like you said, multi-stakeholder, more complex sort of organization that have their different leadership structures, and each one of those sort of I don't want to say silos, but those different stakeholders have their different priorities or different success metrics, and I could see why there's a level of complexity there where you have to kind of take a step back and be like, well, what are we actually trying to do? For us, we more serve smaller organizations, and so their goal is usually pretty clear. I need more customers, right?
Yep.
But the way that you achieve that does require to take a step back and think about it from an innovation perspective of like, well, how do I do that? How have I done that? How am I currently doing it? And how can I do that? And that's where when I have told you about the franchise marketer or the franchise owner side, is the way that franchise owners have traditionally done it is I invest in the franchise structure. They have their brand guide. They'll probably set up the website for me. They'll probably give me a marketing budget that I can spend on, but it's all this sort of corporate level stuff that speaks more broadly, not to specific individuals with specific problems. So in the spirit of our conversation, when I mentioned about a level of predictability, but there's still this exploration, I've had my camera battery die, which I have a setup that shouldn't happen, so some sort of power issue. This chair that I'm using, actually the back kind of went out, so like at one point I'm like way back here, and I'm like, what is happening? But damn termites.
Damn termites. That's the nature of the show must go on, and I think that gets back to the point is business. I've had a lot of people say to me over the years, digital transformation projects I've been working on, I could solve all these problems if we could just pause for 2 weeks.
Yeah, right.
Right, but the business doesn't work that way. Take the manufacturing sector because it's the most extreme sector, right? Production in many facilities 24/7, almost 365 days a year, some version thereof. Okay, how do you change a process while it's running and never stops? Mm-hmm. Right? In the news industry, there was a guy named Robin Kwong. At the time, he was at the Financial Times, and he said, there's the lab, the workshop, and the factory floor. Mm-hmm. Right? So how do you work on new ideas in the lab that you then pilot in the workshop that you have to get to a certain technology readiness level before they can hit the factory floor? Because once they hit the factory floor, they have to be reliable. Yep. And they can't break down. And in fact, we'll sacrifice all kinds of inefficiencies for reliability because a breakdown is catastrophic. Could be catastrophic in safety terms, could be catastrophic in just productivity terms, as we can't have any downtime on the line. And so, when you enter high pressure scenarios like that, innovation is a risk, more than anything else. It's viewed from a risk assessment standpoint to start with, because in the lab, you're trying new things. The risk is only, can we get funding for this crazy thing we want to try next?
Yeah.
And you need those spaces where people are creatively imagining what could be, trying things. The workshop is where it's most important. How do you start translating what you imagined into something that can be implemented to impact?
Exactly.
And that impact has to become something repeatable, and it has to become a pattern. So when at InnoEngine, we talk about the 6 gears of innovation, and we talk about ultimately trying to achieve repeatable patterns and models, or RPM. We stick to our metaphors, Andrew. So, you have
Hey,
that idea of accelerating RPM. And if you get to a point that a process makes sense and people know how to run it, then, a company like ours is saying, well, what other problems are there to solve? And so you were
right.
talking about small and mid-sized businesses. In my view, the type of practical innovation we're talking about, yes, you can deploy it on massively complex multi-stakeholder projects, but, flip side of that, we're working with early stage startup founders. The number of players are much smaller, but the questions are sometimes all or nothing questions. Which direction do we head next? What makes the most sense to try next? And those are no less important. The impact, it matters deeply to the organization's future direction. So it's like, okay, it may be much smaller, but the impact on that organization is much bigger. Right? Like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, it could be the life or death of that organization. If they're talking about something at that level, I mean, it could be determine if they're going to be in business in
I mean,
6 to 12 months.
you've been there, right? You've been there as
Oh
you've
yeah.
considered pivots that are, I'm putting it all on the line. I could keep
Hmm.
doing what I was doing, and kind of hit a certain stride, but that stride risks, short-term profit risks long-term obsolescence, right? Like I'm going to ride what this current thing that I'm doing that's working until it hits its logical end. And some
Hmm.
companies do that and then, close the business and move on to the next thing. Or you do
Hmm.
that classic disrupt yourself before somebody else does it for you, is the version of the line that I've heard repeated often in tech circles. So,
Well, yeah, as an example. I mean, this is an obvious example. As you think about Netflix and how they started and what they offered, and then what they shifted to, and now who they are. And it's like, and that takes a constant pushing the boundaries of who you are, what you do, why you do it, and who it's for. Like, and as that level of that innovation. I mean, they're a company who has done that in the successful way, taken what they used to do and who they've become at a larger level with multiple stakeholders probably, and getting everybody aligned on a goal and a vision towards a specific, aiming at, and maybe not even actually knowing the outcome, but just aiming at the goal or the shift that needed to happen, for a company like that.
decisions in retrospect always seem obvious, right? Like,
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
you watch Netflix's move, right, when they initially moved into streaming and separated the DVD by mail business from the fledgling streaming service. There were a lot of people's questions of why are they doing this? This doesn't make sense. The
Yep.
profitability is over here. And so those risks become really important. They have to be carefully taken, and they have to really be thought through. So when we say there is a process that you need to go through, and in my view, we want to carve out a new space, create a new category that is being a partner from the imagination or ideation to the impact and the iteration. So, rather than a consulting firm that will do great research, provide that intelligence and direction back to the company, really important work. That's not a bad thing. There are firms out there that do a great job of doing the background, doing the research, managing the competitive landscape, bringing recommendations back to leaders for companies to implement. There are great implementation partners who are, once you know what you need to do, hey, come in and help us execute this marketing plan, figure out the legal implications, build the business model. Because we're always working on something that's new, want to work in an ideal world kind of throughout that whole value stream with the company. But we really want to come in when a company gets stuck, wherever they're at in the process. Hey, can we come in and help figure out why you're stuck, help you get over that chasm and get going, get out of idling.
Yeah.
Because idling is wasting resources, it's wasting time, it's wasting, and if you talk about a startup that only has so much burn rate, then idling, there's not much gas in the tank to idle with.
That's right.
And so anytime we can come in and figure out why are you not gaining traction, why are you not moving, how do we get you moving on? It could be for the company as a whole, or it could be on a very specific, a team with a process or a project that is stuck.
Yeah.
And how do we figure out what's causing that? How do we get it going? But not how do we recommend how you get going and then leave. It's okay, let's roll up our sleeves together until we've got this figured out. So in that way, in the construction business, it's a design build, right? How do we help you design the process, but also be part of building it out? Or it's we're often more mechanics than we are engineering firms because we're actually wanting to get in there, take it apart,
Right.
figure it out together, get hands-on.
Totally. Yeah. I like the design build kind of thought line there. And I think most people who don't just call themselves one thing or don't just do one thing and see how the different pieces of the parts connected are in effect designers, and they don't just want to be like, here, give the blueprints, because actually I don't know if you can do the blueprints, or maybe you have mixed priorities pulling you, like you have to deal with operations or deal with employee turnover, you got to deal with churn, you got to deal with other issues that, like, let me partner with you to put in this blueprint because I understand how it's designed and I can help you implement it in a way, build it to where it in effect is helping you more than you just kind of haphazardly putting that together, building it on your own based on my designs.
Absolutely, and it's why when we're tackling problems, the problem statement really matters. What are we trying to
Yeah.
solve, and does everybody agree? A lot of that imagination work. Our first gear is imagination. A lot of that imagination work is: do we all have the same vision of what done looks like, what there is? Are we all working toward the same imagined end? And how do we get to a place where we share an imagination for what that's going to look like on the other side, or find where we have shared imagination? That's a lot of work in and of itself. But the funny thing, like even as we've talked about workshops and other things that we're doing, it's not we believe that there are a lot of people who have taken this career trajectory. It just doesn't have a label or a name.
Right.
So we're calling it NO engineers, but because that's our parlance. But whatever you call it, there are these folks who have to roll up their sleeves and figure out a problem when it hasn't been done before, and often they're doing it alongside other things that are their job, right? That I've got to figure this out, and I've also got to. I don't know, when you're a founder, you know what this means, right? You've got to pay the bills, you've got to hold the camera, you've got to fix the problems when they go wrong, you've got to deal with the knock on the door, and you've got to figure out this complex thing.
Yep.
And rarely can one person do that on their own. So when we say all these things are a collaborative effort, we're doing workshops. We thought, hey, do we invite the person who's the engineer in their company to come to a workshop? But it's like rarely is that one person, or rarely can that be one person and it work. So
Yeah.
they have to be doing it in partnership. So we started talking about ideators and impactors. Okay, inside a company, there's who do you go to when you're trying to spitball and come up with a new way of doing things? And who is also the person who helps figure out, is that feasible? Can that work in the organization? Could that become repeatable? And that that friction or that combined brain power of people taking two different roles in a conversation is where a lot of the magic happens, right?
Yep.
So, what if we tried this? What if we tried that? And there's that
Yep.
partner, and you could switch those roles simultaneously, right?
Yep.
You could be in a conversation and be an ideator for the first half, and then the other person's an ideator, and you're the impactor. But you start playing that role of saying, okay, what if we tried this? Now the other person's devil's advocate and saying, or hey, how will that work? Is that feasible? Could we follow through on it? Could we operationalize that? And that creative process becomes really important, but it's a team sport, not an individual sport. And really, as we formed our company, that was true for us. 3 co-founders, largely who worked in different industries prior to coming into this, realizing, hey, whether it's healthcare or government or academia or manufacturing, IT, software, media, marketing, whatever, all these different fields that we have worked in collectively, a lot of these process questions and challenges are similar. They are practical. They're not big pie in the sky, oh, let's go dream for a day or build the product of the future. It can be that, but a lot of these things are very practical, applied to real and immediate business problems. But the process needs to be intentional of how you tackle those. And the diversity of thought of bringing people in who are going through a similar process, but they're playing different roles, they're feeding off each other, they're bringing different experiences to the table, that's vital.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like we could talk for like 3 hours about this stuff. Turn it into a Rogan podcast, but you and I, being the individuals we are, have multiple roles. I can't just sit down and talk to someone for 3 hours as much as I would love to. But I think the main things I wanted to talk about with you, with your storytelling, with the different ways to think about problem, solution, design, build, the collaboration, community building. I think we covered a lot of that. Is there anything that maybe we didn't cover that you wanted to maybe hit on before we kind of wrap this up?
We have these 6 gears of our innovation process. So that goes from imagination to intelligence. How are we gathering the intel we need to know everything we need to know to implement a new way of doing things? Infrastructure, okay. We've imagined what we're going to do. We have all the intelligence we need to move forward. What physical infrastructure, human infrastructure are we missing in order to move that forward? Then as you go into the implementation, that's obviously a whole process in and of itself. You're ultimately looking at the impact of that implementation, measuring it, assessing it, figuring out what you need to do differently, and then you're building new iterations. And so for us, those are the 6. They all started with an I. It's amazing how that happened. Of course, complete happenstance. But you've got the 6 I's of the innovation, the 6 gears of innovation. As we go through that process, we find that the place that people get stuck could be at any gear along those lines, right? It's like, okay, I got to the infrastructure stage, right? We figured out what we wanted to do. We imagined what we wanted to do, and we did all the intel, but we don't have all the players at the table we need to make the music. You get stuck. It could be at the impact standpoint. We did an iteration, we did an implementation, but we now don't know how to think about the impact, how to translate that to other departments, how to explain it, how to think about how we'd invest in doing it again, what needs to happen differently, how to scale it up, scale it out, and make it replicable. Often, though, here's what I find. Imagination is the gear that people understand the least and may spend the least time on. And yet, when people get stuck, there's a high frequency that the imagination, they may be stuck over here, but that imagination gear is what caused them to be stuck because they skipped over that process or they did a very rudimentary version of that. And then you find that different people in the organization imagined a different thing, and now you're trying to build something One person thinks you're building a gas-powered car, the other person thinks you're building an EV, somebody else thinks you're building a bicycle, and you only discover it when you're in the middle of the implementation. Or you were limited, you didn't know what was possible, and so you imagined something small, and you're not thinking about new capabilities, new technologies. So that's where my background being from world building, to go back to the beginning of our conversations, thinking about those immersive story worlds of soap operas and wrestling, and that you're building a future world that you're trying to design a process into. You need to spend some real time thinking about what that could look like. There's an academic at NYU, Stephen Duncombe, who says, how do you not be hindered by the tyranny of the possible? That if you limit yourself to immediately going to, well, here's what we can achieve today, that you've not thought about, imagine what we could be doing next, then you're going to build out these small continual improvement projects. And there's a place for that, that's important, but that's how you end up kind of riding yourself into obsolescence if you're not very careful, that you think, okay, in 2 years the whole world's going to look different. How are we designing toward that? How are we building toward that, rather than perfecting a dying science or art? And you've seen this in your industry, marketing, continuously, right? To your point, okay, we can figure out how to get perfect at a thing that's increasingly becoming irrelevant. Writing the best metadata, being an HTML programmer to build websites, right? When I got started in the digital realm, it's like if you knew how to write in HTML, you might be able to make six figures. And now everybody creates a Squarespace site in 3 minutes, right? So you don't need those skills. But the creative process work ends up being really similar, and that imagination work becomes, it's sometimes often the most important thing, but also the thing that people understand and know how to invest in the least, because it feels squishy.
That's right.
And
That's so right. I'll leave you with this just as kind of scaffold off of what you just said. I'm reading a book right now called The Theology of Making by Makoto Fujimura, and I'm only like chapter 1 in, but this idea of imagination as a place to create the new, to move into a space where we're continually called to bringing in the new, people take that for granted. They get stuck in these systems and these builds and these things that they understand in these comfortable places that kind of keep them stuck without really considering what's needed within that imaginative space to move you into the new. And to tie back all this together, from my perspective, that I was going with this conversation, is I think that's done in commune. I think that level of imagination of thinking of what's possible, what's new for this regenerative process, this new stuff, is done in commune. And if you think about it from that perspective, it gives purpose to what you're doing within the thing that you create, the problem that you solve. And I think there's a level of beauty in that a lot of times I don't think even businesses understand that, hey, if you think about it from that perspective, you aren't just doing this thing to make money. You're contributing to a bigger picture, and we can participate in that together.
I appreciate that you said that, and that's where these world building exercises and this corporate imagination, as you say, it's a team sport. It requires, to go back to our earlier conversation, an ensemble cast. And it's this big collective effort. But it also gives everybody a role to play in where you're headed, and that sense of meaning and that investment in what you're building. And that becomes really important, because if things are constantly changing, you need people who understand the whole business process and can think about, hey, the company's shifting, our processes are shifting, here's how my job is continuing to shift, and I'm ready to roll with that, and I'm ready to try what's next, because that's the world we live in. I'll give a recommended reading to you. There's a business writer. I had the great fortune to work with her on some projects. She recently passed away. Her name's Carol Sanford. She's written a whole series of books about regenerative businesses and how do you build companies that are constantly reinvesting and building, thinking about how they're connected to the communities around them, their people. And her first book was called The Responsible Business. So her beginning of her argument was, in order for companies to be truly responsible, they have to be thinking about how everybody contributes and how everybody plays a role. And, this is capitalism, but it's capitalism that acts in a responsible way.
That's right. That's right.
And it also, back to regenerative, the more you act in that way and think in that way, you're creating businesses that build long-term value, long-term reputation. If you, I mentioned at the beginning accrual, right? That complexity can accrue. Same with reputation and value. If you accrue a lot of value and positive reputation, then if you hit a moment of crisis or a situation where you're trying to figure things out, you'll have a lot of that accrual that if it starts to erode, you've built it up, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to think about that not just in times of crisis, but especially in times of when nothing's going wrong. That's when you've got the benefit to think strategically,
That's right.
to accrue that meaning, that good reputation, so that it's there for you when you hit a disruption point.
Yeah, man. I might just do a part two at some point with you and I going deeper into these things, because I love.
We could talk about Kentucky storytelling. We could talk
Yeah.
about the evolution of the film and media industries.
Yeah.
We could talk about XR production and VR and production of the future. A lot of things we've spent a lot of time talking about, but didn't even get to it all today.
That's right. Honestly, though, I think in our time today, I think we covered the things I wanted to cover, because there's sort of this like layer of foundation that you have to establish in terms of like why you do what you do, how you do what you do, what that even kind of looks like, before you can start to really take those lines out into more practical things on like these certain, industries or technologies, or maybe even stories you're trying to tell. Because if you set that kind of bedrock, then every one of those things start to tie together and sort of make sense.
And that's where those core patterns and models become important. Because again, every problem has its unique facets, every industry has its unique elements, every organization has its own culture.
Yeah.
But the process of dealing with innovation, of trying something new, there are a series of steps. There's a logic to it. There's a practicality to it that folks can learn. And in our case, we want to help partner as folks are going through it, because there's a way to learn from what's happened before, even if you're tackling something that's not been done before.
Totally. Well, I'll cut this off now before we keep going. But I think there's definitely a part two in our future, talking about some of these other things. But I appreciate you dealing with me with all these technical issues. But it just made our point. It's just layers of metaphors is what it ended up being.
Always planes, trains, and automobiles. You get there however you can.
That's right. Well, thanks, Sam, for your time, and good luck with everything with InnoEngine, and I'm sure we'll chat again soon.
Same. Excited to see Forerunners rebranding, your own evolution, and morphing into a full creative strategy firm that works with companies to use, as you say, from soup to nuts, business strategy on down. There's a lot we could get into just on that transformation. But that would just be one more thing.
That's right. Add it to the list. That's right.
Next time on As the World Turns, to be continued.
Yeah, in our next soap opera, wrestling episode, we'll dive right in.
Absolutely, we'll tackle that at WrestleMania. Right.
Yeah, that's right.
We're building toward the big rematch.
Don't tempt me with a theme to put together multiple people and call it the WrestleMania of BG when it comes to these ideas.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
All right, Sam. Take care, man. See ya.